The arms industry, a global business, manufactures and sells weapons and military technology and equipment. It consists of commercial industry involved in research and development, engineering, production, and the servicing of military material, equipment, and facilities. Arms-producing companies, also referred to as defense contractors or as the military industry, produce arms mainly for the armed forces of states. Departments of government also operate in the arms industry, buying and selling weapons, munitions and other military items. Products include guns, ammunition, missiles, military aircraft, military vehicles, ships, electronic systems, and more. The arms industry also provides other logistical and operational support. Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimated in 2012 that 2012 military expenditures were roughly $1.8 trillion United States dollars. This represents a relative decline from 1990 when military expenditures made up 4% of world GDP. Part of the money goes to the procurement of military hardware and services from the military industry. The combined arms sales of the top 100 largest arms-producing companies amounted to an estimated $395 billion in 2012 according to SIPRI. In 2004, over $30 billion were spent in the international arms trade. According to SIPRI, the volume of international transfers of major weapons in 2010-14 was 16% higher than in 2005-2009. The five biggest exporters in 2010-2014 were the United States, Russia, China, Germany and France, and the five biggest importers were India, Saudi Arabia, China, the United Arab Emirates and Pakistan. Many industrialized countries have a domestic arms industry to supply their own military forces. Some countries also have a substantial legal or illegal domestic trade in weapons for use by its citizens. Illegal trade in small arms occurs in many countries and regions affected by political instability. The Small Arms Survey estimates that 875 million small arms circulate worldwide, produced by more than 1,000 companies from nearly 100 countries. Contracts to supply a given country's military are awarded by governments, making arms contracts of substantial political importance. The link between politics and the arms trade can result in the development of what U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower described as a military-industrial complex, where the armed forces, commerce, and politics become closely linked. Similarly to the European defense procurement, various corporations, some publicly held, others private, bid for these contracts, which are often worth many billions of dollars. Sometimes, as with the contract for the International Joint Strike Fighter, a competitive tendering process takes place, with the decision made on the merits of the designs submitted by the companies involved. Other times, no bidding, a competition takes place. History. During the early modern period, France, United Kingdom, Netherlands and some states in Germany became self-sufficient in arms production. With diffusion and migration of skilled workers to more peripheral countries such as Portugal and Russia, the modern arms industry emerged in the second half of the 19th century as a product of the creation and expansion of the first large military-industrial companies. As smaller countries could no longer produce cutting-edge military equipment with their indigenous resources and capacity, they increasingly began to contract the manufacture of military equipment, such as battleships, artillery pieces and rifles, to foreign firms. In 1854, the British government awarded a contract to the Ellsworth Ordnance Company of industrialist William Armstrong for the supply of his latest breech-loading rifled artillery pieces. This galvanized the private sector into weapons production, with the surplus being increasingly exported to foreign countries. Armstrong became one of the first international arms dealers, selling his weapon systems to governments across the world from Brazil to Japan. In 1884, he opened a shipyard at Ellsworth to specialize in warship production. At the time, it was the only factory in the world that could build a battleship and arm it completely. The factory produced warships for many navies, including the Imperial Japanese Navy. Several Armstrong cruisers played an important role in defeating the Russian fleet at the Battle of Tsushima in 1905. In the American Civil War in 1861, the North had a distinct advantage over the South as it relied on using the breech-loading rifle against the muskets of the South. This began the transition to industrially produced mechanized weapons such as the Gatling gun. This industrial innovation in the defense industry was adopted by Prussia in 1866 and AMP 1870–71 in its defeat of Austria and France respectively. By this time the machine gun had begun entering into the militaries. The first example of its effectiveness was in 1899 during the Boer War and in 1905 during the Russo-Japanese War. However, Germany were leaders in innovation of weapons and used this innovation, nearly defeating the Allies in World War I. In 1885, France decided to capitalize on this increasingly lucrative form of trade and repealed its ban on weapon exports. The regulatory framework for the period up to the First World War was characterized by a laissez-faire policy that placed little obstruction in the way of weapons exports. Due to the carnage of World War I, arms traders began to be regarded with odium as merchants of death, and were accused of having instigated and perpetuated the war in order to maximize the profits from arms sales. An inquiry into these allegations in Britain failed to find evidence to support them. However, the sea change in attitude about war more generally meant that governments began to control and regulate the trade themselves. The volume of the arms trade greatly increased during the 20th century, and it began to be used as a political tool, especially during the Cold War, where the United States and the USSR supplied weapons to the proxies across the world, particularly Third World countries. Sectors: land-based weapons. This category includes everything from light arms and land mines to heavy artillery, and the majority of producers are small. Many are located in Third World countries. International trade in handguns, machine guns, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and other relatively inexpensive weapons is substantial. There is relatively little regulation at the international level, and as a result, many weapons fall into the hands of organized crime, rebel forces, terrorists, war regimes under sanctions. Small Arms: The Control Arms Campaign, founded by Amnesty International, Oxfam, and the International Action Network on Small Arms, estimated in 2003 that there are over 639 million small arms in circulation, and that over 1,135 companies based in more than 98 different countries manufacture small arms, as well as the various components and ammunition. Aerospace systems encompassing military aircraft, conventional missiles, and military satellites. This is the most technologically advanced sector of the market. It is also the least competitive from an economic standpoint, with a handful of companies dominating the entire market. The top clients and major producers are virtually all located in the Western world and Russia, with the United States easily in first place. Prominent aerospace firms include Rolls-Royce, BAE, Dassault Aviation, Sukhoi, Mikoyan, EADS, Leonardo Finmeccanica, Thales Group, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman and Boeing. There are also several multinational consortia mostly involved in the manufacturing of fighter jets, such as the Eurofighter. The largest military contract in history, signed in October 2001, involved the development of the Joint Strike Fighter. Naval systems. Some of the world's great powers maintain substantial naval forces to provide a global presence, with the largest nations possessing aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines and advanced anti-air defense systems. The vast majority of military ships are conventionally powered, but some are nuclear-powered. There is also a large global market in second-hand naval vessels, generally purchased by developing countries from Western governments. Cybersecurity industry. The cybersecurity industry is becoming the most important defense industry as cyber attacks are being deemed as one of the greatest risks to defense in the next 10 years, as cited by the NATO review in 2013. Therefore, high levels of investment has been placed in the cybersecurity industry to produce new software to protect the ever-growing transition to digitally run hardware. For the military industry, it is vital that protections are used for systems used for reconnaissance, surveillance and intelligence gathering. However, to protect the cyber world from attacks, there are advanced cyber protection strategies used, such as content, cloud and wireless security. These can be intertwined to form several secure layers. Nevertheless, cyber attacks and cyber attackers have become more advanced in the field, using techniques such as dynamic Trojan horse network, internet worm, zero-day attack, and stealth bot. As a result, the cybersecurity industry has had to improve the defense technologies to remove any vulnerability to cyber attacks using systems such as the security of information, next-generation firewalls and DDoS techniques. As the threat to computers grows, the demand for cyber protection will rise, resulting in the growth of the cybersecurity industry. It is expected that the industry will be dominated by the defense and homeland security agencies that will make up 40% of the industry. Investment. As the threat to computers increases, governments have begun to invest and allocate funds to the cyber industry. The U.S. government has allocated $14 billion for cybersecurity in 2016. The UK government has allocated £860 million its National Cyber Security Programme. Major suppliers. As the investment increases, the demand from organizations to improve the cyber security systems for these markets increases as well. The major organizations involved in cyber defense are Intel, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, the Boeing Company, General Dynamics, world's largest defense budgets, international arms transfers. According to Research Institute (SIPRI), the volume of international transfers of major weapons in 2010-14 was 16% higher than in 2005-2009. The five biggest exporters in 2010-14 were the United States, Russia, China, Germany and France, and the five biggest importers were India, Saudi Arabia, China, the United Arab Emirates and Pakistan. The flow of arms to Africa, the Americas, Asia and Oceania, and the Middle East increased significantly between 2005 to 2009 and 2010-14. While there was a notable decrease in the flow to Europe, SIPRI has identified 60 countries as exporters of major weapons in 2010-14. The top 5 exporters during the period were responsible for almost 74% of all arms exports. The composition of the 5 largest exporters of arms changed between 2005 to 2009 and 2010 to 14, while the USA and Russia remained by far the largest exporters. China narrowly, but notably, replaced Germany as the 3rd largest exporter, and the United Kingdom dropped outside the top 5. The top 5 exported 14% more arms in 2010 to 14 than the top 5 in 2005 to 2009. In 2010 to 14, 153 countries imported major weapons. The top 5 recipients accounted for 33% of the total arms imports during the period. India, China and the UAE were among the top 5 importers in both 2005 to 2009 and 2010 to 14. Asia and Oceania accounted for nearly half of imports in 2010 to 14, followed by the Middle East, Europe, the Americas and Africa. SIPRI also identified 7 groups of rebel forces as importers of major weapons in 2010 to 14, but none of them accounted for more than 0.02% of total deliveries. World's largest arms exporters. The units in the stable are so-called trend indicator values expressed in millions of US dollars at 1990s prices. These values do not represent real financial flows but are a crude instrument to estimate volumes of arms transfers, regardless of the contracted prices, which can be as low as 0 in the case of military aid. Ordered by descending 2014 values. The information is from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Next to SIPRI, there are several other sources that provide data on international transfers of arms. These include national reports by national governments about arms exports, the UN Register on Conventional Arms, and an annual publication by the U.S. Congressional Research Service that includes data on arms exports to developing countries as compiled by U.S. intelligence agencies. A list of such sources can be found at the SIPRI website. Due to the different methodologies and definitions used, different sources often provide significantly different data. For example, according to Statistics Central Bureau, Norway exports a greater value of arms than many of the nations listed above. Some of the differences are possibly due to deliberate over- or under-reporting by some of the sources. Governments may claim high arms exports as part of the role in marketing efforts of the national arms industry, or they may claim low arms exports in order to be perceived as a responsible international actor. As of 2008, Britain has become the world's leading developer of arms, with British company BAE Systems. Defense group BAE Systems is the first company outside the United States to reach the top position, thanks to a deal with the Pentagon for mine-resistant vehicles to be used in Iraq and Afghanistan. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, a defense think tank, the former British Aerospace Group's arms sales are ahead of American market leaders Lockheed Martin and Boeing. The report reveals BAE's U.S. subsidiary was alone responsible for 61.5% of the group's arms sales and around 58.5% of total group sales. This demonstrates BAE's increasing reliance on orders for conventional weapons as the United States cuts back on its nuclear arsenal. The British figures were also boosted by orders for Eurofighter Typhoon jets from Saudi Arabia, world's largest arms importers. The units in the stable are so-called trend indicator values expressed in millions of US dollars. These values do not represent real financial flows but are a crude instrument to estimate volumes of arms transfers, regardless of the contracted prices, which can be as low as 0 in the case of military aid. List of major weapon manufacturers. Private military contractors are private companies that provide logistics, manpower, and other expenditures for a military force. Major arms industry corporations by nation. Largest defense industry companies. This is a list of the world's largest arms manufacturers and other military service companies who profit the most from the war economy. Their origin is shown as well. The information is based on a list published by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute for 2013. The list provided by the SIPRI excludes companies based in China. Arms control. Arms control refers to international restrictions upon the development, production, stockpiling, proliferation and usage of small arms, conventional weapons, and weapons of mass destruction. It is typically exercised through the use of diplomacy, which seeks to persuade governments to accept such limitations through agreements and treaties, although it may also be forced upon non-consenting governments. Oscar Arias Sanchez, president of Costa Rica, has stated, notable international arms control treaties: Geneva Protocol on Chemical and Biological Weapons, 1925. Outer Space Treaty, signed and entered into force 1967. Biological Weapons Convention, signed 1972, entered into force 1975. Missile Technology Control Regime, 1987. Chemical Weapons Convention, signed 1993, entered into force 1997. Ottawa Treaty on Anti-Personnel Landmines, signed 1997, entered into force 1999. New START Treaty, signed by Russia and the United States in April 2010, entered into force in February 2011. Arms Trade Treaty, concluded in 2013, entered into force on the 24th of December 2014. The European Council stated to the United Nations General Assembly,